Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our show, To Your Health. I'm Gilbert Wardian, your host. And the show, To Your Health, is dedicated to all the health and healing professionals out there who have dedicated their lives to the world of health and wholeness and healing and really understanding what that is all about. A lot of times this means leaving a recognized and acknowledged medical profession and going in a whole new direction. It takes a lot of courage to do that. We've had some medical doctors on our show who have gone through the entire medical training, and they realize that's not quite for them, and they go a whole new route and go into the area of what they call holistic healing. Today we have a really interesting speaker with us. We have Dr. Bill Caradonna. Dr. Bill has his practice on Lower Queen Anne Hill here in Seattle, and he had his beginnings as a registered pharmacist, then became a naturopathic physician, and he has a specialization in an area called iridology. Iridology, and a lot of you have probably never even heard of this, is a study of the iris of the eye, and a lot can be told from that. So I've known about it for many years. I've been totally fascinated by this study. I know you're going to find this extremely interesting, so please stay tuned. And won't you please welcome me, won't you please join me in welcoming Dr. Bill Caradonna. Bill, welcome to our show.
Glad to be here.
Really a pleasure to have you on the show, especially knowing that the background and credentials you bring with you. It's just really, really neat to have you here. So, Bill, tell us exactly what is iridology, and how did it get its start?
Well, we're all familiar with irises as the windows to the soul, and a picture like this is so well known. It's like one of the most common pictures of how the eyes can capture an emotion,
yes,
or intensity, or in this case. And interestingly enough, they tracked her down many years later. This was all National Geographic.
Wow.
And you can see her now. But the eyes, here's another famous person that has eyes that people are attracted to. We make connections with people through our eyes. Our eyes really give us the awareness of how people are feeling, how they're relating, how they're reacting. It's just true what they say about the light shines from the eyes. In iridology, we're looking specifically at the iris structure and color. And this is quite detailed. People don't realize how much detail there is in the iris, and of course we'll be looking at this in just a minute. And what's interesting is that this is not just a genetically random occurrence, and you can tell a lot about somebody from their irises. And what we're talking about in particular here is both physical information about somebody's body, and also emotional, psychological patterns that we have inherited.
Now let me see if I understand this. You're saying that from the iris of the eye, not only can we tell physical things about the body, but actually emotional patterns and maybe psychological patterns about the person as well?
That's correct. There is a
Wow.
kind of broad personality information that you can pick up from this.
So it sounds like this is almost a little bit like fingerprinting. Like everybody has a very unique fingerprint, and perhaps the eyes are something like this as well.
Interesting point, because actually the fingerprints have about 40 different areas of recognition, and the iris has 250.
Really?
There's a process called biometrics, which is identifying the body through different structures of the body, voice recognition, face recognition, palms and fingerprints, etc. Well, also with the iris. So iris recognition is actually the most detailed study of the identification. And in hundreds of thousands of examples of doing iris recognition, there hasn't been a single failure.
Very impressive. Wow. So there's obviously a tremendous amount going on with the iris of the eye, and most of us wouldn't have, unless we see some enlarged pictures of irises and really study it, you really don't even know that that's all going on. So.
That's correct. Right. So anybody that watches this show, next time you see an iris, you're going to have a different view of it.
And we have some wonderful pictures of irises today, so please stay tuned. I think you're going to be totally fascinated, maybe even amazed and possibly blown away by what you're going to see here today. So, Doctor, how did iridology have its beginnings? How far back does this go? Does it go back 10 or 20 years or 100 years or 200 years? Have you done much work in tracing the beginnings and the roots of iridology, and how has it evolved to where it is today? Is it much more of a refined science than it was, say, 50 or 100 years ago?
The origins of iridology in what we call modern times goes back to the late 1800s. The first book was published in 1891 by a Hungarian physician, and soon after that, another one by a Swedish physician. These people were beginning to observe that there was differences in irises, and they were trying to correlate how that tied in with people's health. And so they were the pioneers. They were the first people that really got this going. Then in the early 1900s, the first book in America was published by somebody who emigrated from Austria, and then another book in 1904. I have a few books here, original books, one from 1919, see if I can hold this up here, and another one from 1921. And it's wonderful to see where they started and how they evolved the work. Unfortunately, they did not have color photos to work with, and they would use these color plates that would try and demonstrate what they were talking about. So it was really challenging. Eventually, photography came along. The first really good pictures started coming in the mid-1930s, and the work evolved from there. What was interesting is the work really evolved in Europe, but in America, due to all the emphasis on the suppression of natural medicine, the AMA's activities to support the what's currently modern Western medicine, a lot of natural medicine basically barely hung on in the mid-1900s, and only recently has had a resurgence of interest, which of course is to our benefit.
So that probably had a real dampening effect on the evolution of iridology in this country. And so what you're saying, basically, it continued to evolve over in Europe.
Yes.
And we kind of stopped for a while here. And so you have actually some European books, don't you?
Yes, I do. Here's what we consider to be our Bible. This was by a German MD named Joseph Dack, and it's a little dog-eared because I've worn it out over time. This was first published in 1965 in German and in 1983 in English. And so there wasn't availability of this sort of information in the U.S. at the time. I'll just see if I can show you examples of the detail in this book here. He wrote another book in the early 80s that was published in the U.S. in 1985. And what happened was, because of the distance between the continents and the lack of language capabilities of understanding, really there was two totally different developments of iridology. In the U.S., it pretty much stayed along where they knew what they knew in the 1920s and 30s. And over time, the Europeans were able to really flesh this information out further. So what happened was the practice in America, which was kept alive by a chiropractor physician named Dr. Bernard Jensen, he really promoted iridology and its usefulness. And without him, we might not even be hearing about it today. So he really...
I have one of his books at home on my bookshelf, and has these beautiful plates of the irises of the eye, and kind of goes through and explains the different areas of the eye that relate to different parts of the body. And I've always been totally fascinated by that.
Right. We owe him a lot of gratitude for doing that. But what was the challenge was getting the new information over here. And when I started studying natural medicine in the early 80s, one of my instructors at a school I attended was from Germany and had learned about iridology, and then come across the Deck German text and began to read it and found that what the Germans were talking about was remarkably different than what was here in America. So he began to examine this further and found that it was very, very useful information.
So you found a different approach in Europe versus the way iridology was being approached here in the United States. And it was a very significant difference in terms of your diagnosis and the information you gleaned from the eye?
It was a remarkable difference, and what happened was the Germans began to really understand what we call the constitutional approach, the big picture of how somebody's body reacts to the world. And by understanding the big picture, you can then look at individual signs in the eye and make more sense out of them. The American way was mostly looking at the map and the sign, and the map and the sign. When I mentioned map, along with the color and structure, there are specific areas in the eye that seem to relate to particular organ systems. So that's where maps, iris maps, have been developed over time.
Somewhat the same as in like reflexology, you see these maps of the foot.
Exactly.
With specific areas that relate to specific organs. So they tried to do that kind of a mapping for the iris of the eye as well.
Exactly.
And that was kind of like for this country, for the United States, but in Germany they weren't really doing that kind of mapping.
Well, they were doing mapping as well, but they had a focus first on framing the picture and then filling in the background before looking at the individual pieces.
So with the iris of the eye can actually represent the whole person. Like from the iris of the eye, you can tell how much about somebody.
Well, you can, on a physical, and the whole person is very true. It's one of the most holistic things that I know in terms of assessment and understanding somebody. In the physical side of things, and we know they're interconnected, but we can see people's areas of resiliency and deficiency. And you're more liable to get sick or have symptoms in areas that are deficient, and more liable to be able to withstand negative effects if you're very resilient.
Mm-hmm.
So this evaluation alone is very valuable to understand why people feel the way they do. You know, we try and measure ourselves against other people. We try and say, well, this person gets sick all the time and I don't. But what we really need to do is understand ourselves as individuals and use our own yardstick to, our own individual yardstick to measure ourselves.
So it's like really each one of us has a very unique constitution. Some people can take a lot more stress than other people. And I suppose that in the iris diagnosis that you do in your practice, does this help in helping you to define for people what their limits are?
That's one of the most useful things that I do. And it's not that if somebody has lower resiliency, they're weak, and they have great resiliency and they're strong. That's not it at all, because people with great resiliency can be very ill. And that's because they've done all the wrong things and not known when to stop and when to take care of themselves. A person with less resiliency might have more symptoms and be forced to kind of pay attention. So a lot of times people that get involved in holistic health are often people who have had illnesses and have sought other ways to address these illnesses, and then been able to use that information in their own work.
Now, Bill, you're also a naturopathic physician. Now, which came first in your development, the naturopathic physician or the iridology?
Actually, what came first was being a pharmacist.
A pharmacist?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I started out trying to help people with their health in the practice of pharmacy. I went to pharmacy school, graduated, and practiced. What helped me look at things a little differently was in the last year of pharmacy school, I was very stressed. It was a difficult program, and not feeling well, losing weight, just really having challenges. Somebody came to me with a multivitamin and protein powder formula and said, you ought to try this. It's unconditionally guaranteed if it doesn't work. And I said, look, I'm the one that knows everything about everything because I'm a Western medicine, I'm in the pipeline. And I certainly didn't believe it was going to help, but being pragmatic about how I was feeling, I took the supplements, and I couldn't get over it. I felt better. So that kind of made my blinders go from here to here.
So all of a sudden you realized that what you had been doing wasn't the panacea for everything, and there were other answers outside that box that you're in.
Right. I started recognizing that through nutrition, and when I worked in community pharmacy settings, I would recommend some of these things I was learning because I was beginning to read about this and trying to educate myself. And some of the things would really work, and then other things wouldn't, and I wouldn't understand why. But what happened was it was my customers in the pharmacy that got me to look further because they were frustrated due to the side effects of the medication, the fact that they were told they had to take them for the rest of their lives. They were taking multiple medications and weren't getting better. All these things finally just overwhelmed me. And to stay true to my desire to help people with their health, I had to go find some answers somewhere. The classic example is the mother whose child has had ear infections over and over again, and each time they get an antibiotic, and each time a stronger antibiotic, and yet the child doesn't get better. And so it was this kind of frustration that forced me to look elsewhere.
Wow. So, so you got your iridology training in the early '80s somewhere?
Right. I went to study at a school in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which was a little haven of alternative medicine back then. You have to remember, back then, alternative medicine was pretty much quackery. And so to be involved in that, you know, it wasn't well supported. And that's where I met the instructor who taught me iridology was the primary influence on me doing this work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know with myself, I first started getting involved and becoming aware of the whole alternative field of healing back in the, this would have been back in the 70s.
Oh, really?
And where I ran across iridology, there was a fellow by the name of, his name was, all I know his name was Gabriel, and he came down from Canada every 4 or 5 months. I was working at a co-op, natural foods co-op in Spokane at the time. And a friend of mine kept saying, Gilbert, you got to get an iris reading from Gabriel. He's really good. So I thought, well, what could it hurt? You know, I'll go find out. So I went to get this diagnosis by this guy, Gabriel. Now, I walked in. Now, this guy had never seen me before in my life or his life. So he didn't know me from Adam. And I walked in. He says, okay, here's the rules. He says, I'll look at your eyes. He says, I'm going to tell you exactly what I see. And he says, I'm not going to make up any stories. It's going to be exactly what I see is what I'm going to tell you. And is that okay with you? And I said, well, sure. So anyway, he diagnosed my eyes. And I walked out of there in a state of shock because this man, who never knew me from Adam, he literally looked into my heart and my soul and my body and my mind. And I was stunned. I was totally stunned. And so just from that experience, I didn't know what he was doing. But I know this stuff worked, and I was in shock. So I've always been really interested in this since. And so to find out that you're here in Seattle and you use iridology in your practice, I thought this is really exciting. I want to talk more about this. So it was a great experience.
Well, when I was studying, I was learning, my degree at that time was in natural health sciences from this school. So I learned about all the different alternative medicine practices from Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, chiropractic, nutrition, herbs, massage, etc. And then I further studied nutrition, and then I wanted to go into all these other studies, but what I realized was I kept coming back to iridology because that helped me understand who I was working with. I found nothing as useful to be able to understand the person sitting in front of me asking me for my help, and understanding in the holistic model on a physical level and a psychological, emotional level.
Wow. Very, very neat. So is that basically, are you kind of like, you really latched onto iridology? That's one of your primary tools that you use now in your diagnosis, is that correct?
Right. When I see a patient in my practice, I always look at their irises, and if I don't, I would feel like I'm working with one hand behind my back. And what happened was I ended up moving to Seattle in the late 80s and teaching at Bastyr University, and then I decided to get my legal naturopathic physician's degree, and so I could be licensed and practice and help people that way. So that was my end degree.
Wow. So, doctor, how do you look at somebody's eye? Just get up real close and you peer in their eyes. You have some way. Do you have some way to magnify this? Do you photograph it? For the people out there, what do you do to diagnose and to see somebody's iris?
You can use anything as small as a handheld magnifying light. This is a 4-power light. We start off our students with this. I use a 10-power light for more detailed information in my practice. And I have what's called a slit lamp microscope, which allows me to look. It has a chin rest and a forehead rest, and I can look at people's eyes in great detail, and that's a 20-power magnification. But then other things we do is have specialized cameras to take iris photos. And now the digital cameras have come along to a significant improvement to be able to take good quality iris photos digitally.
So if somebody just wanted to get like a picture of their iris, could you do that for them? Is that something that you do? I mean, it looks like you need certain equipment to get a good picture of the iris.
Right, and that was one of the problems with the development of iridology, and certain misunderstandings that went on early on was the photography was inconsistent. It was simply a matter of quality of photography and the ability to take consistent photos, which was a challenge. So now we don't have those issues, but initially they were challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see slides or pictures of photos. We'll see photos here in just a minute.
Would this be a good time to take a look at a few photos, or should we talk about something else first? You want to talk about the map of the iris at all? Would that be, what direction should we go from here?
Actually, if you want to pan over here, the first thing we can do is really, really understand how the iris information is best used. In our health status, there's a equation I use.
While you're talking, I'm going to go behind you there and close that curtain so that white doesn't show, but go ahead. Continue.
Okay. So this equation really identifies where we're at with our health pictures. We have our genetic inheritance, which now the genetics are getting a lot of publicity, but basically we inherit certain things from our family lineage, but it's not that everybody inherits the same things. Then we have what we do with that genetic inheritance, which is our environment, and this includes our diet and lifestyle, and how we live our lives and the choices that we make in terms of eating and all the different factors that come into our sleep, our stress levels, our exercise levels, etc., all influence our health. And emotional factors, again in the holistic model, really influence our health. And then finally age. We can get away with a lot of things in our younger years that we can't get away with in our older years. So clearly there, the age card has to be played. And as we get older, it's an annoying fact. Now, the iris tells us this. It tells us what we've been blessed with for our, how we're going to react to the world, our strengths and weaknesses. And all these dynamics play into our physical status, but we have to add in these too. So I can't look at somebody's eye and go, oh, you have a disease name. That's not an appropriate way to use iridology. You can't do it. But I can see what combinations of things would ultimately create a problem. And in naturopathic medicine, we work really hard at finding the cause and fixing it. So all these dynamics that go on in creating an illness, people can have the same symptoms, but in one person they arrive from this set of circumstances, and from another person this set of circumstances. So rather than just treat the symptoms alone, we're treating the underlying causes.
Yeah.
And while you're here, just since we're over at this table, let's go ahead and scan and come in close here. This is a iridology chart that I put together to basically allow people to recognize the areas of the iris that relate to certain body systems or organs. And then here's another. There are many charts out there. Here's another one. This is a one associated with Joseph Deck, where there's a lot more detail. But what I find is that I don't need the kind of deep detail that goes on here.
So what is that like at the very top of that one? I can't quite see it on the screen here. What does that say up there? Is that the cerebrum?
Yeah, this is the
Pituitary.
brain. This
There's
is the
the
brain
pituitary.
area, pituitary. You can identify certain gland areas. It's probably easier to do this here. For instance, speaking of glands, so pituitary, adrenal glands show up here. Thyroid is a little trickier. It's we see this here, though. There's so many influences on the thyroid that it's not as big a part of the chart.
So you can really tell from somebody's eye with this, you know, if there's problem areas that they might be dealing with.
What we're seeing is primarily the resiliency in that area.
Ah.
So if you have low resiliency in the adrenal area and you have a very stressed out life with low sleep levels, sleep quality, insufficient sleep, poor nutrition, then over time your adrenals are going to not be able to support you, and we can come into having a lot of different symptoms, including blood sugar issues, sleep issues, high cortisol, etc.
Wow. So at this point, do you think we should take a look at some photographs?
Sure.
Okay. What would you, where should we go for this?
Well, let's go over
charts
to
here?
go
ahead.
the poster first. And this will help us just see some general patterns.
Start up
Now,
here.
when I talk, let's just go back for a bit and look at all four pictures if you can. I don't have a lot of brown eyes in these examples simply because I felt for purposes of TV that the blue eye types would show more detail. But you can see fiber density. This eye has a lot of fiber density. The fibers are very tight, close together, and have many layers. And this person, there's a lot of openings in their fibers. And then sometimes the fiber openings are in a specific type of pattern. We call this a daisy petal pattern. But then other areas are tight. And then we also have coloration, where we have sometimes coloration around just the pupil, other times the whole iris. And then we have these specific pigments that can occur in people. And there's other odd structures like these dots around the outside of the eye too. You know, this is, I see the irises as art. They're just beautiful. Every eye I look at, to me, is an incredibly beautiful structure. And it's just amazing the detail that we can see with this iris.
You know, I have a friend that takes pictures of irises and she makes them into art. She's
Yes.
actually creating a book of iris art, and it's totally stunning.
It is, and people don't realize this.
Yes.
Once I started learning this, every person that came by, I wanted to look deeply in their eyes, which is kind of a suspicious activity unless they know what you're doing. So now I'll
Take a look
talk
at
about this just for a few moments here in terms of the psychological emotional patterns. We look at each one. This person where the iris fibers are basically straight, there aren't any openings, and there aren't any pigments, this is called the stream type. The fibers stream out from the center of the eye. This person tends to be very sensitive and very aware. They like everything in balance, and they work really hard to keep everybody around them in balance. So I know that if these people can easily get overwhelmed, and when I'm talking to them, I have to say to them sometimes, you know, it's important for you to learn that you can't always keep everything in balance, and to learn to be comfortable with the fact that there is times when the waters are choppy and things get rocky. But their desire is to create the safe harbor for people and to smooth the waters.
Interesting.
It is very
Wow.
interesting. While we're on this eye, I'll point out one other iris sign here, which are these what we call contraction furrows. And you can see these clearly. What these relate to is kind of a wound-up nature. Now that can be very positive. People can be very productive with these structures.
You might find something like that maybe in what they call the A-type personality.
Yes.
You know, kind of wound up. They're really highly motivated individuals.
That's correct, though the A-type personality also has certain things about seeing them against the world and other negative connotations, which creates a lot of stress on their body.
I see.
When I have somebody with a lot of these signs, I will tell them to acknowledge the fact that they won't have enough hours in the day to accomplish everything that they want to, and that they really need to learn to back off and learn to say no and learn to set limits. Otherwise, they can wear themselves out. They get stressed out. And these people get a lot of neuromuscular tension. The tight shoulders, the tight jaw, they don't breathe very deeply. They often eat very fast because they're just so wound up. So practices of unwinding the springs, such as aerobic exercise, massage, deep breathing, Tai Chi, meditation, are all really important for them. Now this person over here, we call this the flower type. And by the way, these emotional models that I'm using come from somebody named Denny Johnson, who named his approach to this the RAYID method, R-A-Y-I-D. And a little later I'll put some books up in charts for you to see. The flower type person tends to react to the world in a feeling, emotional, spontaneous manner. And that's the way they are. They can just react and then they'll move on.
So that's like those flower type patterns all the way around the center there. It's like, it does look like a flower opening up.
Exactly. It's very beautiful. Now at the same time, this is the digestive area right here in the iris. So, and some of these areas relate to endocrine issues with digestion or other hormones. So I look at this eye, this person with this eye, and I know that they're liable to have a lot of digestive complaints and certain other hormonal complaints. And that allows me immediately as a naturopathic physician to focus on supporting those areas, balancing those areas. This eye here is, with these specific pigments, is called the jewel type. And this type of individual is very mental, very analytical, very thinking. They often tend to be in accounting, whereas this type of person would be more in the arts. Now those are broad categories or generalizations.
Is that those areas of pigmentation they call the jewels there?
Yes, right.
And so that might be a little bit more of a tendency to be mental,
They
or
analyze, think, everything goes in the brain first.
Interesting.
Right. And then the last type over here, you'll see a combination of these pigments and the flower type openings. This person is what we call the shaker. They tend to not live life in the middle of the road. They tend to live life more on the edges, extreme success, extreme failure. They'll break the mold, they'll go do different things. But they also need a tremendous amount of support because their body can't take the extreme activities that they'll do. And I'm not talking about necessarily parachuting or jumping off of bridges or something, but just the way that they live their life. So in relationships, the shaker type attracts the opposite stream type frequently.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Which the stream type person creates balance. This person needs balance. Now what the stream person gets from this shaker type is excitement. So you see how that works. In the same sense, the flower type emotional person might be attracted to the analytical person for stability, and the analytical person might be attracted to the emotional person for being able to bring that level of emotionality into their life. A lot of times, though, they don't recognize it, then they fight.
Have you ever thought about using iris diagnosis for dating matches?
Oh, a long time ago, right. We've made more money with that than with helping people with their health. But now, again, I'm using these in a broad sense.
Yeah.
There's way more specific information. And the main point I would want to make here is that truly in the holistic model, you need to understand, or we need to understand the individual, because all these things influence our health and make us a more balanced individual if we can address these things. And there's nothing like just a little bit of education for people to understand how to use their lives in a more efficient manner. Some of the most important things I tell people are based on just these concepts here about how to we all want to be understood, and we're often not understood, and we're often given stories from our parents or other people which will say, why aren't you like this? You should be like this. When what we really can see is the true individual and work from there. I hope that makes sense.
So really, like in a larger family, I mean, you could have every child can have totally different patterns in their iris there, and really have totally different emotional makeups, orientation to the world, everything.
That's correct. And what I love doing family counseling, because again, if everybody can understand everybody else, then the quality of life goes up tremendously. I mean, in a certain sense, I'm in a disease process business of being a licensed naturopathic physician, but my goal is to help people with the quality of their life and have them get the most out of their life possible.
So, Doctor, I've heard, I think there's an understanding or there has been an understanding in the area of iridology in American circles that you can change something in your eye. If you change your diet, if you change your patterns of living and so forth, you can eliminate certain specks or areas in your eye or improve it. Is that true?
Actually, that's mostly a misnomer, and that came from a lot of the inconsistent photography and imaging that went on for many years. The Europeans moved away from that before the American model, and we've done specific before and after observations and not seen this to be true. So your iris is basically like your fingerprint. There are some colorations that can change. Some of the pigmentation can change, but not the overall structure itself. And with the pigmentation changing, we observe it, and when we pay attention to these things, but we can't make broad categorical opinions about what it means.
Wow. Wow. Well, this is just totally fascinating, these pictures of the eyes. I had no idea there was so much detail in there. Now, actually...
do you want to do your eyes now?
Yeah, actually I had a friend take a picture of my eyes so that the doctor could take a look at it, we could see what's there. And so why don't we go ahead and do that right now and just see what we can find out about your host here. So here's my eyes. Let me switch over here and we'll refocus the camera.
And this was, you might want to point out again, taken with the high quality iris camera. You can't just take a good picture of the eye with any regular camera. It has to be specially designed.
Right. So this, almost really, to have a picture of the iris of the eye, it's almost something that I should think anybody would want to have, because you can really tell so much about yourself or your significant other or your children with this.
Right, though I tell people not to try and figure it out on their own.
Yes.
You know, you want to go to a professional to...
It takes a lot of study, and I imagine really looking at a lot of different eyes to start seeing the patterns that are there.
After we do this, we can talk about certification and how to identify quality iridology education.
Great.
So here you are, and you can see it's a blue eye, though it looks kind of greenish. And people would say sometimes maybe you have hazel eyes or green eyes. And they probably sometimes look different depending on the shirt you're wearing or the lighting in the room, etc. But it's really just the dynamics of the coloration.
Mm-hmm.
And around the digestive zone here, there's a greater coloration of this brown. And we pay attention to everything in the eye. You know, the iris tells us what to look at. And then we see some of this kind of congestive pattern coming out a little bit into the outer part of the eye, and then some certain specific pigment dots, and then some openings in the iris structure as well. So in the other eye, if you want to go over there, there's the same overall constitution that we talk about, but then some of the individual signs are a little different. For instance, you see some small openings in the iris tissue right here and something like that, and a little pigment up there. So overall, and can you get them both in the screen now?
Yeah, I think so.
Let's see if that still shows up. Good. Okay. So overall, doing a measurement of resiliency, there isn't a lot of these openings, so you come in on a resilient to very resilient level, meaning that you won't get sick as often. If you do get sick, you bounce back quicker. You can heap more abuse on your body and get away with it longer. Not that that's necessarily a good idea.
But that seems to be true for me, though, yes.
Uh-huh.
You know, a lot of times at work, there's people getting sick all around me, and like, I don't catch it.
Right, right. And there are other factors involved with that too, as we talked about, but this is just a general thing that I've seen in the 20-some-odd years I've been doing this. And then we had talked about those contraction furrows before, and sure enough, you have these as well. So this gives you a productive nature to probably give you the drive to, maybe have your own television program on, you know, the public station. And this can lead to neuromuscular tension, as I mentioned, the tight shoulders and jaw, etc. The tendency to, well, let's put it this way, if a massage therapist put their hands on you, they would find tight muscles, and you would be a good client.
Oh, yes. They definitely find tight muscles, yes.
Yeah. So in the same sense, again, of what I said before, it would be important to learn certain limitations and how to balance your life out so that you weren't constantly frustrated by not being able to accomplish everything you wanted to. This area of focus here indicates, first of all, a tendency to experience your world and then hold it more inward. And so we talked about the stream type before. There's a few pigments here and a few flower openings. Overall, you're the stream type sensitive, paying attention to details, aware of how other people are feeling. And it can get to be overwhelmed because, like a sponge that soaks up information, you need to squeeze the sponge every once in a while. And that's where exercise and other limiting methods of being overwhelmed is very helpful. But the tendency is to hold it all in, and a lot of times people with this coloration here and some little less resiliency in the structure of the digestive system would then have digestive symptoms. So I would be asking you about a digestive history with that. And also, the coloration is somewhat of a liver, a brown, which we associate with liver. And this happens to be the liver area in the iris, and there's a specific brown pigment here. So I would be cautioning you to make sure that you didn't abuse your liver through alcohol, chemical intake. Sometimes in people's occupations, it exposes them to chemicals or other toxins, etc. High-fat diet is bad for the liver too. And the healthier your liver is, then the more your liver will be able to function by keeping your blood clean and you operating in a more efficient manner. And if not, there'll be more challenges in the digestive area, especially intestines, and then some of this will come out further and kind of congest your body. So there could be sinus congestion or mucus congestion or other ways of your body just not being that efficient. So as a naturopath, I know that no matter what complaints you come in with and no matter what I do with you, it's going to be important for me to make sure that your digestive functions are working really well, really efficiently, and that your liver is well supported and you're not doing negative things.
Wow. All that from my eyes.
That, yeah, yes.
Now that one area there on the left with this, like the flowers there, now is that related to any particular part of the body?
That's the heart area. The primary heart area is in this side right here, and you have some small signs right there. I would be asking you about cardiovascular issues with your family, any cardiovascular history. And the left side has a little less of a physical impact than the right, but the fact that it's so strong there, again, I would talk about heart issues emotionally, because somebody, if their heart energy was flowing properly, then the energy flows well, and there's less of a challenge with heart stuff coming out on a physical level. Because a lot of times a physical situation or symptom is what the body is trying to get, is how the body is trying to get your attention. And usually we can find an emotional component that is part of maintaining those symptoms.
Wow. Well, that is truly amazing how much the eye does reveal, especially when you have a really close-up photo like that. So do you, as a standard rule, do you take pictures of all your clients that come in, your patients that come in?
I try and get pictures of most of my patients to put in their chart, so that at some point, if I need to refer to them, if the patient isn't there, I can do that.
I want to let all of you know that you're listening to Dr. Bill Caradonna, naturopathic physician and iridologist. Practices on Lower Queen Anne, and if you would like to contact him, you can reach him at 206-281-4282. That's 281-4282. So, wow.
Let's cover the certification and education thing
okay.
before we run out of time.
Okay,
here.
well, let's talk about that.
I brought, I'll just pull these things over.
Okay.
Just, by the way, to show more international information about iridology kind of around the world, here's another German book that's most recent, and as you can see, it's the original German copy, and we're blessed when they translate it into English. Here is a book from Spain, from a Spanish physician. This is in Portuguese. It's from a physician in Brazil. Here is a Congress, proceedings of a Congress, the 6th one they've had in Brazil. And here's a research journal that comes out of England. So again, you can see that there's activity around the world.
It's really amazing. It really is worldwide. So this isn't just a pockets of interest here and there. This is a major international investigation and undertaking.
Right, right. And again, the difficulties include language, talking to each other, but we are doing our best. The internet really helps to share information. Here's, I co-founded an organization 20-some-odd years ago to help bring iridology up to the modern level here in the U.S., North America, and elsewhere. And the organization that we have, the International Iridology Practitioners Association, puts out things like a magazine. We have newsletters. We put on a symposium every year. Here's the next one coming up. And we publish research articles periodically And these are a way to get information out. The challenge has been to get these into the Western medicine pipeline because they aren't. And therefore, the information that's available through Western medicine research is not really appropriate information. A lot of the research that's been done by Western medicine has been poorly designed and using some of these outdated methods that iridologists used to use. And a lot of the iridologists that were involved with these researchers were not professionals in the health field, so they didn't really understand the dynamics of research. Therefore, there's been a lot of negative research, and the positive research is just harder to come by. We published, I love this one, this is a Russian physician that published that we published his research. It basically related the iris signs to how many sick days people had in
Really?
a standard population of factory workers in Russia. And it was a classic statistical correlation between the amount of iris signs, which then relates to the amount of potential imbalances that somebody can have, and the amount of sick days. The people that had very little iris signs generally were not sick as often. This goes back to the resiliency thing, like you mentioned. And the people that had the greatest amount of iris signs had the greatest amount of sick days.
Wow. Wow.
So our organization has education and certification standards that, you know, any evolving science has to create these standards and then have people understand the value of them.
Do you have a website where people can find
Yes.
out more? I guess you have one under construction right now?
Well, my personal one, but the organization, we're a tax-exempt nonprofit organization. We have been for over 10 years. And that's www.iridologyassn.org.
Okay, there I have it on
There
the
you
screen
go.
there.
How about that?
So if you want to look it up
Actually, it's IRI.
whoops.
IRI.
We'll be right back here.
Yeah. And, you know, we have a board of directors, and it's a full-fledged organization. Great.
So I guess there's a lot of information available out there. Okay, as far as iridology goes, Doctor, I understand there are a few. There's been a few studies out there that you indicated basically they were kind of flawed studies, but there's some people say that iridology doesn't work. But after seeing everything you have here, I mean, I can't see how it cannot work.
Right. It's a matter of just finding the information or having the information available to have people understand it, because it's been misunderstood. And a lot of information is there in Western medicine research, just not under the title of iridology as well. This is one of my favorite things to do, is gather this information and be able to correlate it with our iris information. But it is a block to progress to not be in the mainstream, like a lot of natural medicine is. And there's still a lot of resistance to having alternative medicine be recognized, even though in other countries it's practiced right alongside of Western medicine. The ideal thing is for everybody to work together.
Now, is iridology, is it used extensively like in Germany or other countries? Is it more recognized than it is here?
Germany is the primary country that's gone the farthest, and Russia is right behind them. In Russia, only medical doctors study iridology.
Say in Russia?
In Russia, it's
all the medical doctors do.
Only medical doctors study iridology.
Really?
Right.
Wow.
Whereas here, lay people can study it.
Very interesting. Well, that would be a whole new development in our society if all the medical doctors started studying iridology, wouldn't it? Amazing. Well, Doctor, I think we're getting close to running out of time here. Do you have any wrap-up comments for people in the last minute or so? And in terms of iridology, in terms of health and well-being and all of those good things?
Well, in my experience as a naturopathic physician, I see everybody as an individual, and iridology helps me see you in that way and be far more efficient with what I can do to help people. But in general, we just need to understand that the quality of our life could be supported very well using these techniques and using Western medicine when appropriate as well. And what better gift than having good health and a harmonious life can there be?
Amen. Well, Doctor, thank you so much for coming and joining us here on our show. Really appreciate everything you brought here and the information that you have and your enthusiasm and inspiration to pursue a health lifestyle. So thank you again.
It's my pleasure.
Very good. So I'd like all of you out there to know you've been watching the show To Your Health. We're on every Thursday from noon until 1 p.m.